For centuries, humanity was seen as weak and insignificant. A young species from a volatile world. Short-lived. Emotion-driven. Chronically divided. In the vast records of the Galactic Council, Earth was catalogued with clinical indifference, low threat potential, minimal strategic value. Humanity's early expansion was clumsy and uneven, punctuated by internal conflicts that never seemed to end. To an ancient galaxy that prized stability above all else, humans looked unfinished. Ignored by the galaxy. Dismissed by those in power. The Council believed strength followed a familiar pattern. Advanced civilizations were orderly, predictable. They rose slowly, stabilized early, and conformed to the structures that had governed the stars for millennia. Humanity did none of that. They argued loudly, failed often, rebuilt constantly. To the Council, this meant weakness. No one realized how dangerous that assumption was. Because humanity did not evolve in a stable environment. They evolved in collapse. Their history was not defined by uninterrupted progress, but by systems breaking when they were needed most. Economies imploded. Governments fell. Supply chains failed overnight. Every generation inherited the lesson that nothing was permanent, and that survival belonged to those who planned for failure instead of denying it. Humans learned early that authority could vanish. That rules could change without warning. That survival required adaptation, not permission. So when humanity finally reached beyond its home system and encountered the wider galaxy, they did not arrive with demands or grand visions. They observed, listened, studied how power actually worked. They noticed something unsettling. The galaxy did not rule through force. It ruled through exclusion. Who could trade? Who could travel? Who could speak without consequence? And who could be erased without a single shot fired? Humanity learned quietly. When formal contact was established, it was intentionally unremarkable. Requests were filed correctly. Protocols followed precisely. No urgency. No ambition. Nothing to provoke attention. Humanity behaved exactly as the Council expected a minor civilization to behave. And then, when pressure mounted and tolerance ran thin, the Council made its decision. Exile. No declarations of war. No fleets dispatched. Humanity was simply removed from the systems that sustained interstellar civilization. Trade routes severed. Diplomatic channels closed. Legal recognition revoked. The Council believed exile was merciful. They believed isolation was final. They believed humanity would fracture, collapse, and quietly disappear, another failed experiment lost to time. They believed exile was the end of humanity. What they never considered was what happens to a species that has already survived abandonment, again and again, long before it ever reached the stars. They never asked what humanity would do when stripped of recognition, legitimacy, and external dependence all at once. They never wondered what a civilization becomes when it stops trying to be included. Because while the galaxy turned away, convinced the problem had resolved itself, humanity was still there, watching, adapting, preparing. And one day, the galaxy would look back and realize something far more frightening than any declaration of war. Exile had not ended humanity. It had freed them. And the mistake would not be understood until it was far too late to undo it. The Galactic Council tightened its grip. Not with fleets or ultimatums. Humanity was not considered worthy of such attention. Instead, the Council used the tools it trusted most: policy, procedure, and quiet exclusion. First came the trade restrictions. Human shipping lanes were flagged for extended compliance review. Docking permissions stalled without explanation. Insurance networks quietly reclassified human vessels as non-viable risk, making commerce collapse without a single law being openly violated. Trade was cut. Medical compounds stopped arriving. Advanced alloys were delayed indefinitely. Precision components vanished from supply chains. Peripheral colonies felt the strain first, then the core worlds. Prices rose. Shortages spread. Council economists monitored the data with confidence. They had seen this pattern many times before. Scarcity bred unrest. Unrest bred division. Division forced submission. Then came the legal severance. Rights were revoked. Human representatives lost access to council chambers. Observer status was suspended under vague language, pending reassessment. Information networks that once returned open data now delivered filtered fragments or silence. Travel permits expired and were not renewed. Diplomatic channels collapsed into automated acknowledgments. Humanity was erased from participation. Not outlawed. Not condemned. Simply removed. Isolation followed. No fleets blockaded Earth. No weapons darkened human skies. The Council didn't need force. They removed humanity from the systems that sustained interstellar civilization, trade, arbitration, legitimacy, and waited. Humanity was pushed into isolation with the certainty of an authority that had done this many times before. The Council expected collapse. They expected humanity's long history of internal division to resurface under pressure. Expected colonies to hoard resources. Expected governments to fracture and blame one another as scarcity deepened. Projections were filed. Months to instability. 1 year to unrest. 2 years to compliance. But the collapse never came. Instead, something deeply unsettling happened. Human systems stabilized. Emergency protocols activated before shortages peaked. Manufacturing priorities shifted quietly, without public debate. Rationing was implemented efficiently and calmly. There were no mass riots. No planetary secessions. Human communication traffic surged, but not with outrage. With coordination. Political rivals who had undermined one another for generations began sharing data without treaties or announcements. Old disputes were shelved, not resolved, but rendered irrelevant. The Council flagged the anomaly. Then dismissed it. They mistook restraint for denial. What they failed to understand was that humanity had rehearsed this scenario its entire history. Economic crashes. Political failures. Environmental disasters. Systems breaking when they were needed most. Isolation wasn't shocking. It was familiar. Humanity did not demand reinstatement. Did not appeal to council morality. Did not threaten retaliation. They did something far more dangerous. They stopped asking. Trade rerouted inward. Local industries expanded into roles once outsourced to the galaxy. Older technologies were revived, redesigned, and scaled beyond what council regulations had ever permitted. Every rule was followed, perfectly. Every clause obeyed to the letter. Every loophole used without technically violating a single statute. Sanctions meant to isolate human space began rippling outward, damaging council-aligned economies that had quietly depended on human adaptability. The Council waited for fracture. It never came. Instead, human space grew quieter, more ordered, more deliberate. Reports began to note a troubling trend. Humanity was becoming self-sufficient. Less responsive to pressure. Less dependent on approval. Less affected by authority that only functioned when it was believed in. Containment had always succeeded because species feared isolation. Humanity did not. They treated it as a condition to engineer around. And somewhere deep in the Council's projections, a realization began to surface, one no one wanted to say aloud. Exile was supposed to end humanity. Instead, it had removed the last reason they ever needed to listen. And that was the moment the Council's certainty began to rot, quietly, invisibly, long before the galaxy would understand what had truly been set in motion. Isolation was meant to finish what Exile had started. That was the Council's confidence. History supported it. Cut a civilization off from trade, legitimacy, and outside support, and it fractured. Old rivalries resurfaced. Cooperation collapsed into competition. Collapse was not a question of if, only when. Humanity should have broken. It didn't. Isolation didn't break humanity. It unified them. At first, the change was almost invisible. Political broadcasts grew shorter. Ideological arguments lost their heat. Leaders who had built power on division found fewer audiences willing to listen. When the last sanctioned trade lanes went silent, humanity stopped arguing about who was right and began asking something far more urgent. Who would still be alive tomorrow? Old divisions vanished. Not erased. Not forgiven. Set aside. Borders still existed on maps, but they stopped dictating behavior. Rival governments paused conflicts that had lasted generations, without treaties, without declarations, without celebration. Humanity didn't glorify unity. They defaulted to it. Because isolation stripped away illusion. There was no higher authority to appeal to. No external stabilizer to rely on. No council fleet arriving to restore order if things went wrong. Humanity was alone. And once that reality settled in, priorities aligned with ruthless clarity. Emergency councils formed across Earth and its colonies, but instead of expanding bureaucracy, they dismantled it. Redundant authorities were merged or discarded. Decision chains were shortened. Not centralized for control, but streamlined for speed. What emerged wasn't an empire. It was coordination. For the first time in human history, every major colony agreed on a single operational framework. Not built on ideology. Not culture. Not ambition. Survival. All colonies stood under one command. It wasn't a throne or a single leader. It was a system, lean, adaptive, intolerant of inefficiency. Authority became situational. Whoever had the clearest data and fastest response acted. Prestige evaporated. Ego became a liability overnight. Logistics became power. Supply chains that once competed synchronized across systems. Manufacturing priorities aligned without negotiation. Research divisions opened archives sealed for generations, sharing breakthroughs once guarded by profit, secrecy, or pride. Humanity stopped optimizing against itself. They optimized for endurance. Military forces changed, not in size, but in purpose. Fleets once designed to deter rivals were restructured to protect infrastructure, evacuation corridors, and population centers. Training doctrine abandoned decisive victories in favor of prolonged survival under catastrophic conditions. Humanity stopped planning for wars they hoped to win. They planned for disasters they intended to outlast. Civilians were folded into preparedness without ceremony. Engineers trained for emergency repair. Medics drilled for mass casualty scenarios. Colonists learned redundancy protocols as naturally as daily routines. Every person became part of the system, not as a soldier, but as a stabilizing component. Humanity did not militarize its population. It prepared it. And then came the silence. No protests. No defiant broadcasts. No pleas sent into the void. Human communication traffic actually decreased, even as coordination reached levels no external observer had ever recorded. Unity did not make humanity louder. It made them efficient, focused, unsettlingly calm. Council analysts, watching from afar, misread the data. Silence had always meant submission before. They believed humanity had accepted exile. That isolation had taught them humility. In truth, isolation had taught humanity clarity. They stopped measuring success by recognition or inclusion. They measured it by resilience. By how well systems held under pressure. By how little external approval mattered when survival was on the line. Isolation did what no treaty ever had. It forced humanity to see itself as a single organism. Every colony understood its role. Every fleet knew its purpose. Every citizen knew what was at stake. If no one else would protect them, they would protect themselves. Not out of anger. Not out of defiance. Out of necessity. And in that moment, quiet, deliberate, and irreversible, the Council's greatest miscalculation became reality. They had not shattered humanity. They had unified it. And a united humanity no longer needed permission from anyone to decide how it would survive. In silence, humanity evolved. There were no announcements. No declarations meant to reclaim attention. No demonstrations staged for a galaxy that had already decided humanity's fate. Humanity had learned that visibility invited interference, and interference invited control. So they worked unseen. Isolation stripped away distraction. Research institutions that once competed for funding, prestige, and ideological dominance were fused into cooperative networks. Projects delayed for political convenience were revived and accelerated by necessity. Engineers stopped designing for optimal conditions and started designing for failure, assuming systems would break, supply lines would vanish, and no external help would ever arrive. New engines came first. Not engines built for speed records or expansionist ambition, but for endurance. Drives capable of operating for years without resupply. Propulsion systems tolerant of damage, inefficiency, and improvised repair. Human ships sacrificed elegance for reliability, favoring systems that could limp forward instead of dying spectacularly. They could go farther without support. They could stay operational without resupply. They no longer needed permission to move. Then came the shields. Galactic doctrine favored singular, overwhelming barriers, immense, elegant constructs that either held perfectly or failed catastrophically. Humanity rejected that philosophy entirely. They layered everything. Adaptive fields that reshaped under stress. Redundant systems that degraded gradually instead of collapsing all at once. Structural composites that absorbed force rather than attempting to negate it outright. Human shields were not invincible. They were persistent. They bent. They cracked. They kept working. Weapons development followed, but quietly. Humanity did not pursue extinction-level firepower or theatrical superweapons. They focused on systems that functioned after prolonged isolation. Weapons that could be repaired in deep space by exhausted crews with limited tools. Human weapons were not impressive. They were dependable. And then there were the fleets. They were not assembled in massive, centralized shipyards that could be observed, catalogued, and targeted. Production was distributed across dozens of systems. Hull sections fabricated in civilian industries. Components built to common standards, modular, interchangeable, resilient. No single ship mattered. No single loss could cripple the whole. Fleets were built not for conquest, but survival. Naval doctrine evolved alongside them. Ships were designed to operate independently, cut off from command, guided by shared principles rather than constant instruction. Crews were cross-trained relentlessly. Every officer understood logistics. Every technician understood combat repair. Human fleets assumed chaos as the baseline. Loss of communication. Overwhelming odds. Extended isolation. They trained until those conditions felt routine. The galaxy noticed nothing. Council sensors detected no alarming mobilization. No aggressive maneuvers. No treaty violations. Human space appeared quiet, constrained, irrelevant. Exactly as intended. While the galaxy looked away, humanity prepared. Not for revenge. For inevitability. Human simulations grew darker. Scenarios assumed hostile powers, collapsing alliances, and enemies immune to negotiation. Victory was redefined. Not defeat the enemy. Ensure continuation. If a colony survived, the mission succeeded. If a fleet endured catastrophic loss and still functioned, the mission succeeded. If humanity remained, everything else was secondary. Command structures flattened. Authority became situational. Any unit could assume control. Any plan could be abandoned instantly if reality demanded it. Humanity stopped fearing failure. They learned to absorb it. The Council, reviewing outdated reports, concluded humanity had stagnated. That isolation had capped their growth. That exile had worked. They were wrong. Humanity had not slowed. They had finished building. What remained was refinement. Stress testing. Quiet positioning beyond assumption and observation. And when the galaxy finally looked back toward the space it had abandoned, when something emerged that diplomacy could not stop and authority could not command, it would not find a broken civilization clawing its way back from exile. It would find a species that had spent years preparing for the moment when no one else would come. Because exile did not end humanity. It taught them exactly how to survive without the galaxy. And when the time came, that knowledge would change everything. The first warning arrived as silence. A frontier system failed to report. No distress call, no debris field, no trace of battle. Council analysts logged it as a relay malfunction and reassigned the sensors. Border regions were unstable. Data gaps were expected. Then a second system went dark. Then a third. By the time unsanctioned jump routes filled with refugees, the pattern could no longer be denied. The ships arrived damaged and overcrowded, carrying corrupted recordings, fragmented telemetry, and a single name spoken with exhausted certainty. The Dominion. They did not announce themselves. They did not negotiate. They arrived. The Dominion was not an alliance or a crusade. It was an empire engineered for expansion, every doctrine refined for speed, efficiency, and permanence. Their fleets moved with mechanical precision, overwhelming defenses before panic could organize into resistance. Worlds fell. Orbital platforms were neutralized in minutes. Planetary shields collapsed under sustained, methodical pressure. Defense fleets were dismantled in sequence, not in heroic last stands, but in clean operations that left no space for improvisation. The Dominion did not seek destruction. They sought ownership. Species were enslaved, not exterminated, catalogued. Populations were sorted by utility. Administrators were retained under supervision. Labor forces reassigned. Entire cultures reduced to production metrics and compliance thresholds. Resistance was not punished publicly. It was removed. Quietly. Efficiently. Permanently. Fear spread faster than the invasion itself. Council-aligned task forces were dispatched, veteran fleets armed with technologies that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. They engaged the Dominion and vanished. Not in spectacular explosions, but in silence. Formations dissolved. Signals cut off mid-transmission. The Dominion studied, adapted, and advanced. And still, the Council argued. Emergency assemblies convened and dissolved into procedural paralysis. Ancient rivalries resurfaced. Voting blocs stalled action. Committees debated jurisdiction and response thresholds, while live feeds showed cities burning and evacuation corridors collapsing. Some delegates called for negotiation. Others demanded sanctions. A few proposed sacrifice, ceding outer systems to buy time. Time was something the Dominion did not allow. As invasion fronts pushed inward, Council authority fractured. Member species recalled fleets to defend their own worlds. Mutual defense treaties were reinterpreted, delayed, or quietly ignored. Trade collapsed as fear overrode obligation. The Council could recommend. It could debate. It could not act. Within cycles, the unthinkable became reality. The Galactic Council, the oldest authority the galaxy had ever known, was losing. That was when the chamber fell silent. Someone said the name no one wanted to hear. Humanity. The objections were immediate. Humanity had been exiled, isolated, declared irrelevant. Their fleets were undocumented. Their technology unverified. Their civilization, by Council projections, should have collapsed long ago under isolation. But others remembered. Human space had gone quiet years before the Dominion appeared. No collapse. No refugee waves. No desperate transmissions begging for reinstatement. Just absence, orderly, deliberate absence. Reluctantly, the Council authorized contact. The message was careful, polite, urgent without sounding desperate. It spoke of shared survival, collective defense, and the need for unity against an existential threat. It did not mention exile. It did not include apologies. Humanity received it. They did not respond immediately. While Council worlds burned, humanity reviewed the data. Dominion fleet movements. Tactical doctrine. Logistics throughput. Behavioral patterns. They compared it against internal simulations, some of which mirrored the unfolding invasion with disturbing precision. The Council expected panic. They got analysis. When humanity finally replied, the response was calm, measured, almost unsettling in its restraint. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses would fail. They stated, plainly, that humanity possessed the capability to intervene. There was no promise of rescue, only consideration. The Council protested, invoked shared destiny, demanded urgency, reminded humanity of what was at stake. Humanity did not hurry. Because another system fell, this one close enough to the Council core that evacuation sirens echoed through the chamber itself. Delegates who had argued procedure moments earlier now begged for intervention. And in that moment, the truth crystallized. The Council had exiled the one civilization that had prepared for abandonment. They had dismissed the species that planned for systemic failure. They had underestimated the people who built for survival instead of dominance. The Dominion did not fear authority. It did not respect tradition. It did not pause for debate. And the only civilization that had planned for an enemy like that was the one the Council had believed Exile would erase. With no leverage left and no illusions remaining, the Galactic Council did the unthinkable. They turned to humanity, not as a subordinate, not as a member, but as the last civilization that might still be capable of acting, while the rest of the galaxy was still arguing over what should be done. And in that choice, the Council finally understood the cost of its assumption. Exile had not ended humanity. It had ensured that when the galaxy faced a threat it could not debate away, the only answer left would come from the civilization it had tried to forget. And humanity was listening, not with desperation, but with decision. The Council expected forgiveness. They prepared for it instinctively, carefully shaped language, regret diluted into miscalculation, responsibility softened into necessity. In every crisis before this one, fear had produced reconciliation. Authority bent just enough to survive. They believed humanity would follow the pattern. Humanity did not. The reply arrived without ceremony. No accusations. No appeals to history. Just confirmation of receipt, validation of the intelligence provided, and a precise list of errors in the Council's threat projections. Errors that grew more damning the longer they were read aloud. The Council responded immediately. Then they waited. When humanity's decision finally came, it was calm, so calm it unsettled the chamber more than outrage ever could. They acknowledged the Dominion threat. They confirmed the Council's defenses would fail. They stated that humanity had prepared for a scenario of this nature. Then came the sentence that ended the debate. We will decide when to act. No conditions followed. No appeal for trust. No demand for apology. Just resolve. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted about moral obligation and shared extinction. Some accused humanity of cruelty. Others of arrogance. A few tried to reassert authority, invoking charters, jurisdiction, and sanctions as if repetition could restore relevance. Humanity did not respond. They didn't need to. Because authority does not survive the moment it is ignored. Within hours, deep space observatories began reporting anomalies near the edges of human-controlled space. Not weapons fire. Not fleet mobilization. Something subtler. Gravitational sensors detected rhythmic distortions, too precise to be natural. Navigation beacons recalibrated themselves without instruction. Light bent at imperceptible angles, as if the structure of space itself were being adjusted rather than disturbed. Council engineers blamed calibration drift. They were wrong. Independent traders began transmitting reports of vast silhouettes appearing and vanishing beyond detection thresholds. Not fleets forming ranks, but structures repositioning with deliberate intent. Patterns emerging across regions too large to be coincidence. Humanity was not rushing to war. They were aligning. A final transmission arrived, short, unencrypted, unmistakably human. Any engagement with the Dominion would occur on human terms. Timing, location, and scope would be determined by human command. Council authorization was unnecessary. Oversight would not be accepted. This was not a threat. It was a boundary. For the first time since its founding, the Galactic Council faced a truth it could not debate away. Humanity did not need its permission, did not fear its displeasure, did not confuse urgency with obligation. As the chamber dissolved into chaos, something unexpected happened on the invasion front. The Dominion slowed. Not halted. Not repelled. Just slowed, enough for their commanders to notice gaps in predictive models that had never failed before. Enough to sense resistance before it appeared. Somewhere beyond the reach of Council authority, something vast finished positioning itself. Space itself began to tremble. Humanity had not yet acted. But the galaxy already understood what the Council had only just grasped. Forgiveness is requested by the powerless. Permission is sought by the dependent. Humanity was neither. And when they finally chose to act, it would not be because the Council had asked, but because humanity had decided the moment had arrived. The Dominion never realized the war had begun. There was no surge of power to announce it. No rupture in subspace. No warning spike screaming across their sensors. One moment, Dominion armadas advanced through conquered systems with mechanical certainty, vast fleets arranged in doctrines that had crushed resistance 100 times before. The next moment, space was no longer empty. Human fleets emerged in perfect silence. They did not arrive from anywhere. There was no translation flash, no violent distortion. They simply resolved into existence, immense shapes unfolding from the void as if space itself had decided to accommodate them. Massive, precise, unstoppable. The formations defied every known tactical doctrine. They were not clustered for assault, not spread for intimidation. They occupied exact positions across light minutes of space, sealing vectors the Dominion had not yet realized were critical. This was not a battle line. It was containment. Dominion sensors struggled to reconcile the data. Targeting solutions lagged behind reality. Command algorithms recalculated endlessly, unable to explain how so much mass had appeared without triggering a single early warning threshold. Before the first firing order could be issued, every channel lit up. Primary command bands. Encrypted tactical relays. Emergency fallback frequencies. Even internal coordination networks thought to be unreachable. One message crossed every protocol simultaneously. Stand down. It was not amplified. It carried no threat. It carried certainty. The Dominion fired. They always did. The opening volley never reached its targets. Human defenses did not intercept the energy. They absorbed it. Layered fields reshaped in real time, bending and redistributing force across systems designed to endure punishment rather than resist it. Power that should have overwhelmed any known shield simply vanished into controlled dissipation. The Dominion adapted instantly. They never fired again. Across the invasion fleet, weapon systems desynchronized by fractions of a second, imperceptible alone, catastrophic together. Power grids slipped out of phase. Reactors throttled to emergency limits. Shields collapsed inward, not destroyed, but rendered inert. Drives failed. Thousands of ships went dead in space. Alive. Intact. Helpless. Humanity had not attacked the fleet. They had removed its ability to fight. Dominion command structures unraveled in moments. Emergency protocols refused to execute. Self-destruct systems failed silently. Engineers flooded dead channels, unable to understand why the redundancies they trusted most had turned against them. Human systems were not overpowering Dominion technology. They were exploiting it. They reached into assumptions so fundamental the Dominion had never thought to protect them. Dependencies that worked flawlessly against weaker civilizations and catastrophically against an opponent that had built everything around resilience instead of dominance. Then one human vessel moved. It advanced alone, gliding forward with deliberate calm. Its hull bore no insignia, no declaration of ownership. Just a presence so controlled it felt inevitable. It transmitted once more. This conflict is concluded. There were no demands. No negotiations. The statement was final. As the signal propagated through Dominion command networks, fleets in neighboring systems halted mid-advance. Slave transports powered down. Occupation forces abandoned positions without orders, unsure whether movement itself would trigger the same silent neutralization. The war ended before the enemy understood it had begun. Only then did humanity acknowledge the galaxy. A single open transmission, brief, factual, and devoid of triumph. The threat had been neutralized. Hostilities were concluded. No territory had changed hands. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to stop the war. Council observers watched in stunned silence as Dominion armadas drifted powerless in the dark, entire fleets undone without spectacle, without devastation, without permission. And in that moment, the truth became impossible to ignore. Exile had not weakened humanity. Isolation had not diminished them. It had forced them to prepare for a universe where no one else would come. The Council had believed exile was the end. Instead, it was the beginning of a force that did not need recognition, did not seek authority, and did not fight wars the way the galaxy understood them. The Dominion had come to conquer. Humanity had come to end the fight. And the galaxy would never again confuse the two. The Council tried to reclaim control. Emergency sessions were convened within hours of the Dominion's defeat. Ancient charters were retrieved and recited as if tradition itself could reassert authority. Oversight committees were proposed, expanded, and revised again. Jurisdiction was declared in sharper language, louder voices, and increasingly desperate tones. The galaxy listened. Then it moved on. It was too late. Because control does not return once it has been proven unnecessary. Worlds rebuilt without waiting for council authorization. Defense compacts formed laterally, between neighbors who had watched procedure fail while systems burned. Trade resumed along routes humanity had stabilized, not the sanctioned corridors the council once regulated. The council still existed, but it no longer decided what happened next. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They declined every offer of permanent leadership, refused seats of expanded authority, ignored proposals to restructure galactic governance around them. They claimed no territory, imposed no laws, demanded no tribute. They simply stepped back. Not into exile, but into readiness. Human fleets dispersed into the dark in patterns no strategist could fully map. They did not linger over capitals or patrol borders. They positioned themselves near fracture zones, regions where history showed authority failed first and consequences spread fastest. Always distant. Always present. Never demanding obedience. Slowly, the galaxy understood what humanity had become. Not conquerors. Not rulers. A contingency. When disputes flared, humanity did not intervene. When old empires tested one another's resolve, humanity remained silent. They issued no threats. They promised no protection. Their existence alone changed behavior. Former Dominion officers, those few left alive and unbound, spoke quietly among themselves. Not of human weapons, but of human restraint. Of fleets that could have annihilated them and chose instead to end the war cleanly, decisively, and without spectacle. That restraint carried more weight than fear ever could. The Council issued one final declaration, warning that a galaxy without centralized authority would descend into chaos. Few listened. Fewer believed it. Because the galaxy had learned something the Council never had. Stability enforced by tradition eventually fails. Stability enforced by readiness endures. Humanity had proven that leadership was not inherited through age, charters, or unanimous votes. It emerged from preparation, from competence, from the willingness to act when action was required, and the discipline to stop when it was not. So the galaxy adapted. It always does. And somewhere beyond the bright halls where authority once lived, humanity watched the stars in silence. Not from thrones. Not from councils. From the dark. Humanity did not rule the galaxy. They had no desire to. They had simply proven a truth no civilization could afford to forget. If darkness rises again, if something worse comes out of the void, if the galaxy hesitates when it matters most, humanity will be there. Not to command, not to conquer, but to make sure there is still a galaxy left when the darkness falls.